The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Happy Jewish New Year to all those who celebrate. Today is the first day of Rosh Hashanah. Over the past, couple of decades, I usually took this day off, but in recent years, I've decided to work it. That's a personal decision, and that's up to me, and I'm glad to be here. This makes me feel good to talk on the radio, so that was part of the decision to work on Rosh Hashanah. I do not work on Yom Kippur, although this year it's on a Saturday, which is an off day for me. But happy New Year to everyone. Had a wonderful dinner last night at my sister's house with the family, and really felt the warmth of that, and I hope that you are celebrating, if you do, today with friends and family. All right, there's a lot of stuff to get into today. The Orioles, of course, going out, scoring just one run over 2 days. You grind, 162 games to get to the postseason. These days, it's somewhat irrelevant whether you win the division or make it as a wild card team, but they, unlike last year, did not win the division. They finished with 10 fewer wins, and they opened a wild card series against a team that lost 106 games last year, and they wind up lasting 2 days and scoring one run. And, as much credit as Mike Elias gets for building this team, and he's done a great job turning things around, you got to supplement prospects with some fairly high-priced free agents, and they really haven't done that. In fact, they only signed one that was what you'd call a top free agent, and that was Craig Kimbrell, the closer, who turned out to be a disaster. They wound up basically releasing him last month, and they're back now. I guess they get Batista back next year after he had the Tommy John surgery, so perhaps he can do as he did 2 years ago, serve as the closer and get through a season healthy. But if you look at what happened with the pitching staff this year, it is, somewhat remarkable they did as well as they did. Now, the trade that they made to get the ace of the staff was key. I mean, that's really a Corbin Burns was a big pickup in the offseason, but the reason he was available is he's going to become a free agent. And the question is, do you re-sign him? I think you do, but he's going to have some big offers from other places. The Nationals were built, and not everybody does it this way, but the Nationals were built on starting pitching. They had three guys that they were able to rely on. Patrick Corbin, who was signed, and I think the fact that Bryce Harper didn't re-sign with the team, didn't take the $300 million offer, was the biggest blessing they had, because that gave them the money to go out and get Corbin, who was the big compliment to Scherzer and Strasburg, and those three carried them to the World Series. The Orioles thought they had enough pitching going into this year, but then John Means, who threw a no-hitter for him 3-4 years ago, maybe 5, he continues to have elbow trouble and needed another Tommy John surgery. Kyle Bradish, Grayson Rodriguez, they were not available for the postseason. They were counting on them. And then, one of the big things was Adley Rutschman, who was so key to their success last year, took a foul tip on his right hand June 27th, and his numbers just collapsed after that. He was hitting .297. The rest of the year, he hit .194. Tests and x-rays came back negative. He insisted he was healthy, but I would not be surprised if there's some hand surgery on the way for Adley Rutschman in the offseason. He also comes up for arbitration this year, so that's going to cost them some money. And they've got some questions as to what they want to do with the bullpen as well. You got Sir Anthony Dominguez and Greg Soto. They're under team control next year. What do you do about that? Neither one of them, the closer that they hope for in this stretch of the season. So, it's very frustrating, especially these days in baseball, because if you get to the playoffs, there's some satisfaction in that. But the climb once you get to the playoffs is so steep and somewhat random. That we had two teams last year in Texas and Arizona that combined for the worst record in World Series history. and that tells you something right there. It's so I don't really know what the answer is. I know there's been a lot of criticism of Brandon Hyde for the job he does during the regular season to get them to this point, but now it's 10 straight, or under him, it's 6 straight playoff losses. And there's no getting around that, especially this year where you don't hit. Team has to hit. The pitching was fine. The pitching was good enough. They gave up 3 runs in 2 games. You figure you're going to win at least one of those. They didn't. And now the season comes to an end. We'll see what happens with David Rubenstein. He has spent money. We know that, especially in this town. He spent a lot of money to help fix up monuments. He's a great philanthropist. And he's a Baltimore native. This is the team he grew up rooting for, and he would like them to win. The question is, when he gets and sits down with Mike Elias, what's the path of action? Is it wild spending? Probably not, because that doesn't work out. And witness to that was Josh Hader. Josh Hader, this is, as Hubie Brown would say, a staggering stat that with the Tigers moving on yesterday against Houston, number one, ending the Astros streak of 7 straight appearances in the ALCS. That's remarkable consistency. Whether they were cheating or not, they were getting there every single year. And they go out in a 2-game sweep this year. Now, Hader was high-priced acquisition in the offseason. They signed him to a 5-year, $95 million deal. That's the second highest contract ever given to a closer. He's only 30 years old. And he didn't deliver this year. And when they needed him to deliver yesterday, he was terrible. He came into a 2-2 game, top of the 8th, and the Tigers were leading 1-0 in the series. They'd won the opening game. And he got to the mound with 2 on and 2 outs. And he walked Spencer Torkelson on 4 pitches to load the bases. Then Ani Ibanez hammered it down the left field line for a bases-clearing double, and the Tigers had a 5-2 lead, and that was the winning margin, 5-2. And, here's Hader making $19 million a year, and the Tigers, the team, the 26-man roster that they had for the playoffs, that they now have as they move on against Cleveland, they have an $18.8 million payroll. So Hader at $19 million, who was a disaster yesterday for the Astros, versus the entire payroll of the Tigers at $18 million, 18.8. Just absolutely. And you criticize the Astros for signing Hader? No, I don't think so. But we do remember here where Hader was the unhittable closer again when he was pitching for Milwaukee 5 years ago, and Juan Soto delivered. It was misplayed ball in the outfield, but a key hit to get them past the Brewers in that wild card game and eventually go on to win the World Series. All right, injuries starting to pile up a little bit for the Commanders. They haven't been hit as hard as many teams in the league, and knock wood, there's been no season-ending injury so far. And there are some players that are becoming healthy now. Marcus Mariota, who was on injured reserve for the first 4 games, he's coming off of that. He practiced yesterday. But there is some concern. Brian Robinson did not practice at all yesterday. Now, maybe it's just a sore knee, and they're giving him a precautionary day off. But he was not on the practice field yesterday. Nick Allegretti, who's been a big addition for them, again, probably just a rest day, didn't practice yesterday. And I guess the most encouraging thing on the injury front is that Austin Ekeler practiced yesterday, though limited, and does believe at this point, going into today's practice, which is going to be one of the few padded practices that they have during the season, that he expects to be a go on Sunday against Cleveland.
Steps, the protocol here, had a non-contact practice today, so very fortunate to I've been working with the staff, getting myself back to feeling like myself. So excited to be back. It was giving me anxiety watching from home. That's something you don't want to do as an active player. But like I said, made it through the process and have one more step tomorrow. First back to padded practice.
So basically, you feel like you're on track to play Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. If tomorrow goes well, padded practice, we'll be back on the field with the boys.
All right, so that's key. I mean, they managed to get by very nicely without him. They were able to run the ball very effectively against Arizona. Cleveland's a much better defense, and I think having Ekeler back is going to be very much a key for them. Home field. Now, remember this. This record that they have, the 3-1 record that has made them seemingly the toast of the NFL, and now people talking about them as division champs because you've got the usual dysfunction going on in Dallas. Philadelphia appears to be a mess, and the Giants just aren't very good. But they have played only one of the 4 games at home, and that was the Giant game where they did nothing but kick field goals, which was good enough, and probably were helped more than anything else that the Giants didn't have a kicker in that game. Kicker got hurt on the opening kickoff. That really was a key in that game. But what they've done in the last 2 in scoring all those points and winning in Cincinnati and blowing the doors off of Arizona. I mean, when you score 38 and 42 points in back-to-back weeks, you're clicking there. Now, can it keep up like that? Maybe not. But this is a different Washington team that comes home for a game on Sunday than the one that they had when they came home to play the Giants in week 2. And Dan Quinn yesterday talking about what the home field means and how much he expects to have a raucous crowd on Sunday afternoon.
But just the home field crowd, like anywhere that I've been that really got rocking, like it's a huge advantage, for the team because as loud as it can get and silent cadences and all that goes with that, it's just an absolute blast. The energy, goes, through the roof. So that's what we'll dig for and keep, battling for it. And, the better that we can play, the more we can create that together. And then it becomes like, man, this is a really hard place to play when you tie all of the things together.
Yeah, Dan Quinn hasn't been here long, right? This is his first season. It's only the second game. He's going to be a head coach of the local team at FedEx, not FedEx, but it's Northwest Field now. Let me point out to him about the silent snap count, if he doesn't know it already. I can't remember the last time that the other team has had to use a silent snap count at home. I remember going all the way back to the 2008 season. So what is that, 16 years ago. And that's when they got off to a good start with Jim Zorn. Believe it or not, Jim Zorn was an awful coach, but in his first year, they were 6-2. And I think they had a bye week after that 6-2 mark, and they were playing at home against the Steelers. This is, when they were still filling up the stadium, and, they were selling tickets to the other team, of course, too, and the Steelers always travel well. But I remember silent snap count for the home team at FedEx Field in those days. So if they can force a silent snap count for Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns, good luck with that. That would be a real plus, because that hasn't happened around here in a long time. The start, and he, I'm sure, gets asked about this, not just the local media, but every other interview that he does, hey, are you surprised by this?
I'm not surprised. I knew the connection would be the number one thing for us to see if we could play well, how long that would take, how connected this team could get on all 3 phases. And so the support of one another, all of those things, that's, to me, the faster we could do that. And I thought the team's done a good job of fast-tracking the feeling out process, putting agendas to the side, absolutely all-out effort. Like, those are the non-negotiables that we'd have to have. I think that, the team has got that way faster than you'd say like a more established team, would have some of those things in place. So those are some of the things that don't show up on the stat sheet that I certainly look for.
Yeah, now, Nick Allegretti, and he's a really good talker. He's going to wind up in the media after he's finished. He's been with those Kansas City Super Bowl teams, so his perspective is important here. And I'm sure that the coaches have talked to him a lot, like, let's keep a lid on this. And I remember going back on this, too. In the 1996 season, which would have been Norv Turner's 3rd year here, they got off to a 7-1 start. Yeah, they had a very easy schedule the way it worked out. But they were 7-1 in 1996. And I remember Darryl Green, who had, at that point, played on 3 Super Bowl teams. Yeah, 3 Super Bowl teams. He lost as a rookie, so he won. He was a 2-time Super Bowl winner at that point. And he said, hey, we're not that good. We're not that good. And people didn't necessarily believe it. They got to 8-3 by winning a game in Philadelphia, and they missed the playoffs that year at 9-7. So there's that perspective that has to be there. Now, Did they have a quarterback like Jaden Daniels? No, they did not. I think that was Gus Frerotte, who was probably playing the best year of his career. He made the Pro Bowl as an alternate that season. But they were benefiting from a very easy schedule at that point. And they were young guys, and, they pretty much turned over the roster once Norv Turner took over in 94. And they didn't handle success very well. And they lost 2 really close, ridiculous games to Arizona that year. Arizona was in the division then. So the perspective of Nick Allegretti is good. And as he comes from a Super Bowl team that just won back-to-back Super Bowls, he's the one to say, yeah, things look good, but remember this.
It's a long season. There's going to be ups and downs. I'm sure at some point this season we're going to hit a defense that thinks they've got something figured out, and they're going to bring some tough pressures for us, or just show us some different looks that we haven't seen. And that's just the National Football League. It's fun because of how hard it is to compete and have success every week. So understanding that it's an 18-week regular season, plus you want to play, a month in the playoffs. So it's going to be a long season. Understand you got to learn from wins, losses, whatever it is. Take advantage of every day. We get a chance to put the pads on. Not sure how long we'll do that, but tomorrow we get a chance to put the pads on. Take advantage of that. So just take advantage of every opportunity we get to compete against each other and then compete on Sundays.
The O-line, it seems like you guys have really gelled really quickly. I mean, run game, pass protects. What's it been like the first 4 weeks? Are you surprised at kind of where you guys are at as a unit right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of fun, and I've said this, pretty much week after week. We're going to continue to get better because we're continuing to learn how each other likes to play, how we like to communicate. And my communication with Ty has gotten better every week. With Luke and Brandon, it's gotten better every week. Even with me and Sam, not playing next to each other, but understanding what he sees as a guard and what I see as a guard, and if we're able to help each other. So it's been really cool how we've been able to develop the communication this quickly, but I think it's going to continue to get better. I think DQ and AP did a great job, getting the entire organization to buy in to understanding that you have to care about each other. It's really hard in this league to build a locker room that feels a connection, because you start training camp with 90 guys, a month and a half later 37 guys are going to get fired. It is hard. So understanding that competing against each other, you can compete against each other but still make each other better.
And he's coming from the current dynasty in the NFL. The Kansas City Chiefs won 3 of the last 4. So what he's saying about the culture here, I'm sure the culture in Kansas City is awfully good there too, with all the winning that's going on and the success that Andy Reid has had with Patrick Mahomes. So it's good to get his comparison here. But when he says it's a long season and we're going to be hit with some adversity, heed that warning. And I think the team has done a good job of that. And I'm going to play some things that Jaden Daniels said yesterday in his news conference, which indicate that he has his head on absolutely correctly. And he said, among other things, when the coaches talk to him, it's important that they tell him things that he needs to hear rather than things he wants to hear. And if you want to know the big difference between the attitude, it seems to me, of Jaden Daniels and RG3, that's summed up in that comment. Telling me things I need to hear rather than things that I want to hear. Peter King, retired now, covered the NFL for over 40 years, and now is, I guess, doing a podcast and enjoying retirement. He showed up on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday with some interesting thoughts and things that I can supplement with a couple of stories of my own. We'll get to that as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So the significance of April 15th in baseball. April 15th, 1947, Jackie Robinson broke the color line, and it is properly celebrated by baseball these days, as every year, every player in the major leagues wears the number that has been officially retired by baseball, number 42, which has great historical significance. And what Jackie Robinson did culturally was one of the biggest achievements, if not the biggest, in the history of sports. And he certainly deserves the iconic status for doing that. What is not celebrated, and I wonder if there might be some thought to this, especially now that Frank Robinson passed away 5 years ago, I think, 5-6 years ago, that baseball might consider honoring Frank Robinson on this day, October 3rd of every year. It'll be during the playoffs, and might be a good time to do that because on October 3rd, Frank Robinson became the first African-American manager in baseball history. Now, if you want to get technical about it, I guess it would be, I don't know the exact date, but sometime in April when he made his debut as a player manager for the Cleveland Indians and not only managed the team, but pinch hit and hit a home run in that game. Frank Robinson managed a long time in the major leagues, I think 16 years, never made the postseason, which is stunning. But, you know, he was saddled with bad teams. He took over the Baltimore Orioles when they were like 0-7, excuse me, and went on to 0-21. And then the following year, he got them to within a whisker of making the playoffs. They had one of the greatest turnarounds in baseball history, but never did make the playoffs. Managed last year with the Nationals the first 2 years that they were in town. And it was actually 15 years to the day after Robinson was hired by Cleveland as the player manager that Art Shell became, ironically, because this is during the season, but 1989, 15 years later, Art Shell became the first black head coach in modern football history. Fritz Pollard had been a coach back in like the early days of the NFL, 1920s, but he on this day in 1989 became coach of the Raiders. So we're going to spend some time on that in the next hour, play some of the audio from that. But this should be recognized as an historic day, I think, for both baseball and football. Basketball was actually the first to have an African-American coach, and that was Bill Russell, who, ironically, was a high school teammate of Frank Robinson growing up in San Francisco. And Bill Russell in 1966 became the first black coach ever, still playing for the Celtics as Red Auerbach retired. So we'll get into that some more football yak as Peter King was on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday. He retired after a really long career covering football. He did it for SI and he did it for NBC. And he was, in my opinion, the hardest working beat guy I ever saw. I was covering the Giants when I first met Pete in 1988. 1988, I was covering the Giants for WFAN, and he was covering them for Newsday just before he went to Sports Illustrated. And he was just, ahead of everybody else. And one of the things he would do was just talk to everybody. He would talk to the chef. He would talk to the strength coach. He would talk to the equipment manager. And he broke many, many stories. And he was considered to be the best football reporter in the country at that time. And Sports Illustrated recognized that. They hired him, and he went on to an incredible career and retired last year. So he lives in Connecticut, and Dan Patrick does his show there. So he showed up in the studio yesterday and was asked by Dan, well, if you could come back and write one story, which one would you write?
I would really love to do Dan Quinn, the Commanders. I really wish they'd just be Washington football team.
I love that.
Don't you? That was the greatest thing. Football team. That would really be fun. I've never met Jaden Daniels. I don't know much about him, but wow, is he impressive. But the other team I would love to be around a lot is Kansas City. Because, look, if Kansas City somehow finds a way this year, they're the Beatles. They're going to be Mahomes as John Lennon. Andy Reid is a portly Paul McCartney. And, they are going to be the biggest thing in sports because obviously in the Super Bowl era, not since Green Bay 60 years ago, where there somebody win 3 titles in a row. And so that, to me, I'm totally fascinated. And, Dan, I think we're going to look back on this era of football, and we're going to say, okay, the first 20 years of this century were owned by Brady. The next 20 years are going to be owned by Mahomes. And one of the biggest reasons is not just talent and all that stuff, but he has the will. And I tell this story. Last year in Frankfurt, when I was covering the game for NBC, they played Miami, and they're playing crappy on offense. And after the game, I interviewed Mahomes on the field for NBC, and I said, man, your offense, you won, but your offense is in trouble. And he goes, oh, we're going to straighten it out. Don't worry, we're going to be okay. And afterwards, I went into the locker room, and I kind of gave him a little fist bump, said, thank you. You didn't have to do that, and I appreciate you doing it. He said, hey, no problem. He says, Peter, I want to tell you, we're going to get this offense straightened out. I guarantee it. I promise you. And he has the will that a lot of people don't have, but that Tom Brady did have.
Yeah, and a story this week that Peter didn't reference, but if you didn't hear about this, Baker Mayfield said something to the effect that when he came to the Buccaneers, he was welcomed by the players who had sort of complained to him about the stressful environment under Tom Brady. That stressful environment, by the way, produced a Super Bowl championship in his first year, and they made the playoffs. I don't know if they made the playoffs the last year he was there, but the second year he was there, they made it. And they were successful, more successful than they'd ever been. And they won a Super Bowl when he was the quarterback there. And Brady correctly, when he heard about it, said, hey, you know what's stressful? Not winning rings. And, yeah, it's hard. Ask the 49ers who played for Bill Walsh about how much fun that was while they were trying to get to the top. Getting to the top is the fun part, but it takes a hell of a lot of hard work, and it's not all fun and games. You have fun after you win. You celebrate on the plane ride home or for a few hours or whatever, and then you get back to grinding. That's the way it works. And if you want to look at a team that's had success, there's no one that's really had, in at least the modern era, this kind of consistent success in a compressed time like the Chiefs have, winning 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. And I did post-game shows with Joe Jacoby for a long time, and we would talk about various things. And the one losing season that Joe Gibbs had in his first go-round, he coached for 12 years in his first coaching stint, which was from 1981 through the 1992 season. And he even went 8-8 in his first year after going 0-5. But in the 1988 season, they went 7-9. And they had won the Super Bowl the year before. In fact, it was, at that time, one of the worst post-Super Bowl season performances ever with a losing season. And Jake said, the team was fat and happy then. And he was too. He was overweight. He got hurt. There's a lot of things that went wrong that year. And sustaining success is tough to do unless you have a leader who's going to grind it out. If there's one negative of the Gibbs run, which rightly puts him in the Hall of Fame and in the discussion for the greatest coach ever, is that he won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks, none of whom are in the Hall of Fame. And only one of them may get some consideration, Joe Theismann, but I don't think he's going to make it either. And you had the historic Super Bowl by Doug Williams, but his career was, to me, not Hall of Fame worthy. But that moment was certainly one of the great moments in NFL history, where he became the first African-American quarterback to start and first to win as well. So if that point is very important there, that it's the willingness to grind, to do what it takes to stay on top. It's one thing to get there. And that's why you don't see many repeat Super Bowl champions. And if they do 3 in a row, yeah, that's historic because no team has ever done it. The Green Bay Packers, you could say yes because they had won the NFL championship after the 1965 season, but there was no Super Bowl then. It was only after the 66 and 67, so they won the first 2 of them. So, yeah, I mean, you probably would have to put them in that discussion, and maybe in the Super Bowl era where it's harder to win. The Packers at that point were playing a 14-game season. I think you had to play, all you had to do was play the championship game. It was the 2 division winners. That was it. And now, you can trip up on any game. You can get injured. There's a 17-game schedule. Well, a lot of things that go into that. More from Peter King. This is about Bill Belichick with his nose pressed up against the glass and where he might wind up next year. He hasn't necessarily said, I absolutely want to coach again, but he's sort of made it clear that would be something he'd be open to. I think catching Don Shula is still very much something he wants to do. And there's even some talk. I don't know how serious it is, But with Doug Peterson and the mess that's going on now in Jacksonville, that they could make a change during the season. I don't think Bill Belichick comes in from the outside during the season, but that's in play as well. King yesterday with Dan Patrick on where Belichick may wind up next year and what the structure of his coaching will look like.
I would assume that somebody's going to give him a shot next year. But, Dan, I would just say this about next year with Bill Belichick. I want to see how accepting he is to some new stuff in football, to analytics, to stuff that I think he's always sort of viewed himself as the smartest guy in the room, even though he wouldn't say that. But he has viewed himself that way, and I think there's more information than ever, and I think he's got to start taking advantage of that information.
Is he going to be a GM, too? Is he going to have, a dual title?
I don't think he should be, because I'm not saying nobody in his right mind would allow Bill to pick all the groceries, but I do think that he's going to have a good deal of say. But look, had he gone to Atlanta, Arthur Blank was not going to neuter or fire Terry Fontenot, the GM. And so Bill was going to have to accept that. And I think, and quite honestly, Dan, he should accept it. He should look at his weakness over the last 6 or 8 years that he did the Patriots. He was a weak evaluator and collector of talent. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, he should. But will he? He's a 72-year-old man who owns 6 Super Bowl rings. I don't know. You get set in your ways. And will he accept somebody over him who's going to make decisions he may disagree with? He managed to do what Bill Parcells always said he was going to do. He said, if you're going to cook the meal, they ought to let you shop for the groceries. And for 20-plus years, he did that in New England and did it well. He did it with a man named Brady, and the man named Brady gave him those 6 Super Bowl championships, and when Brady left, things went south pretty quickly. So we'll see. I mean, the one thing, when Joe Gibbs came back here in 2004, one of the things that was really disappointing for me was that he kept Vinny Serrato around. And I believe he kept Vinny around because he knew that if he had a strong general manager, as he did with Bobby Beathard, that he would have to do things that he didn't necessarily want to do, and that wasn't the way he was going to go about it. Now, remember, there was a power struggle between Gibbs and Beathard. Both of them are in the Hall of Fame, and Beathard, to his grave, was very, very complimentary of Gibbs, who he hired here in 1981. But it got to the point after, let's see, how many years? They started together in 81, and then after the 1989 season, I think it was the 89 season, Beathard left. And he left to take a job with the Chargers. He couched it as, I like to surf, I'm from California, blah, blah, blah. But the reality was he was losing too many of the battles. The way that Jack Kent Cooke would do it, if the two disagreed, he'd decide which one would get the say. He'd have them both in their office. They'd both make their case. And Gibbs was winning too many of them because, let's face it, it's sexier to win on the field than winning off the field, which was what they were doing, not the Bruce Allen way, but the Bobby Beathard way. So I think it makes sense what Peter King is suggesting, that somebody work over Bill Belichick in terms of personnel. But I wonder, and maybe that was what was the deciding factor in that Raheem Morris got the job in Atlanta and Bill Belichick did not. Last thing is on the Hall of Fame. And Peter King was not only a voter for many years, he's now resigned that he's retired, but he was seemingly the most influential voter in the Hall of Fame. And the things that he would say carried a lot of weight. And I believe that he was a big factor in Art Monk waiting as long as he did to get into the Hall of Fame. And finally, King had a conversation with Joe Gibbs, who convinced him that Art deserved to be in the Hall of Fame. And Peter changed his mind. And what do you know? Art Monk got in the Hall of Fame. The quarterbacks around now that are playing, there's certain ones, Patrick Mahomes, if he never plays another down, he's going to go in the Hall of Fame. There's certain guys like that. But there are some question marks, and question marks with quarterbacks who have won Super Bowls, like Russell Wilson. And that was one of the things that was discussed yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show.
I'm hesitant on Russell Wilson. I would like to see him do a little bit more somewhere outside of the cocoon of Seattle, and he hasn't yet, but let's see. The one guy who this year in Detroit on that Sunday night and then against San Francisco, I said to myself, Matthew Stafford, I'm not saying it's an absolute no doubt. Matthew Stafford absolutely has my vote. I think he's this generation's Dan Fouts. And plus, he's got a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Dan Fouts didn't have one. I just think that Matthew Stafford and what he's done with a team that many times has been down and out because of injuries, he just keeps them in every single game. And I think Matthew Stafford's special.
And what I found interesting is these younger quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, C.J. Stroud, and they were gushing over Matthew Stafford.
Yeah.
Gushing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I mean, they grew up on him and they're watching. Now, granted, he wasn't on the big stage, really, other than with the Rams, but they're seeing him and seeing what it's like to be a quarterback, to be able to do what he's doing. And I found that amazing, because if you're a young quarterback, you're probably saying, maybe it's Tom Brady, maybe it's Patrick Mahomes, somebody. They're watching Matthew Stafford when he was in Detroit.
Yeah.
And gushing over him.
Yeah. And I mean, look, everybody's going to say, if you say, oh, Matthew Stafford, the negative people for the Hall of Fame. To me, Matthew Stafford lifted that franchise for so many years into at least mediocrity when they probably didn't even deserve that. And I'd say one of the saddest things I've seen is when his own wife and their kids can't go to the first game of the season because they're going to get booed. I mean, sports fandom has really gone too far when something like that happens. Bothers me.
Well, Dan Campbell, you lose the playoff game and somebody leaks his address and you got, I mean, they should be planting flowers at Dan Campbell's house.
Yeah. He's fabulous. And that whole franchise, last year in training camp, I remember I've been to the Lions over the years in training camp, and there's 16 people there, as a crowd. And last year, it was raining steadily at 7:30 in the morning for an 8:30 practice, and there was a line of people waiting to get in, a long line. I mean, they've changed football in Detroit. Bill Parcells always said the one team that he thought would have been great to coach, not that he looked back and wanted to change his life, would be the Detroit Lions. He just had a fascination because when Parcells was a kid, the Lions meant something.
Yeah, and Tony Dungy said he came close to coaching the Lions because his dad was a Lions fan.
Yep, that was Peter King yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show. The Matthew Stafford stuff. Yeah, the Dan Fouts comparison is somewhat interesting. Fouts never even played in the Super Bowl, didn't make it. Got to an AFC championship game in one of the coldest games ever played in Cincinnati, where the wind was just whipping. The wind chill, some say, I don't know how they measure this, it might have been even lower than it was in Green Bay for the Ice Bowl. The actual temperature was lower for the Ice Bowl, but with the wind chill may have been lower. For whatever it was, a team from California that had won a game in Miami in the brutal heat the week before, having to play the AFC Championship game was tough. But they were the greatest show on grass before the greatest show on turf. They just could score and score and score. Stafford not quite like that, but probably I looked at his career actually before he went to the Rams, kind of like Sonny Jurgensen, that he was playing for bad teams in Detroit, but actually an outstanding quarterback. And then he got the opportunity to go to Los Angeles and won one, which always legitimizes you for the Hall of Fame. Not that he necessarily would have needed that, but when you talk about the great quarterbacks of the game, you don't really mention his name among the first few, right? I mean, it doesn't really register that way. Always Mahomes, number one, and then whoever you want to pick after that. Maybe it's Brock Purdy now. I don't know, but people don't mention his name probably as much as they should, and he would be a slam dunk for the Hall of Fame. And the fact that young quarterbacks really like him is somewhat interesting because playing for the Lions all those years was not very sexy. Coming up, more reaction from Ashburn to the 3-1 start and all the hoopla about Jaden Daniels. Can he keep his feet on the ground? Sounds like he can. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. I believe this is an historic day in sports in that it was on this day 50 years ago that Frank Robinson broke the color line for managers in baseball, something that Jackie Robinson had wished for exactly 2 years earlier. And then 15 years later to the day, Art Shell broke the color line for modern pro football. Really remarkable what October 3rd is and what it means, and probably should be celebrated a little bit more than it is. And I will fill in some of the blanks on that and some of the details of how everything unfolded in both cases. It's really, really, really fascinating stuff. Also, everybody's wigged out about the Commanders right now. The callers, the word Super Bowl are passing people's lips. Let's pump the brakes a little bit because you got to have a really good defense. And this defense isn't very good. Could it be pretty good by the end of the season? Maybe. The secondary has some issues. And I like Mike Sainristil, and he probably is going to be a really good player, but he was really hyped. I mean, Jaden Daniels was hyped and has outrun the hype. Mike Sainristil, he hasn't been a disappointment, but he hasn't really lived up to the hype where you had Nick Saban saying pound per pound, he's the best player in the draft. But he is a guy who is a winner. And I've talked about this over the years with Tony Dorsett. I believe the 2-year stretch that Dorsett had from his senior year at Pitt to his rookie year to the Cowboys might be the greatest 2-year athlete stretch anytime with any sport. And at Pitt during the 1976 season, Tony Dorsett won the Heisman Trophy, played on an undefeated Pitt team, winning the national championship, okay? Then he is drafted number 2 by the Dallas Cowboys, not number 1. The tragic Ricky Bell was taken number 1 by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bell played only 5 years in the league and then died of a disease when he was probably in his 20s still. Very, very sad. But Tony Dorsett, off winning the Heisman Trophy and the national championship, winds up in Dallas on a team that goes on to win the Super Bowl. And I don't think there's anything better than that. Oh, he also won Rookie of the Year. That's right. He didn't win the rushing title. Maybe that's the one thing that was missing. But Heisman Trophy, national championship, Rookie of the Year, Super Bowl championship, all within a 2-season stretch. That's remarkable. Mike Sainristil, you got to look at this, is pretty remarkable too. In the last 19 games that he's played in, that includes the 15 in college where Michigan last year went 15-0 and won the national championship, and the 4 that he's played in the pros, he's lost 1 game. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That every time you step on the field, you're pretty much assured of a victory, except for the opener against Tampa. So there's something to be said for that. And, sometimes players are drafted that way. Like they've gone shopping at the Alabama store a lot. It hasn't produced the kind of results for the team that you'd hope, but they got some good players out of that. Jonathan Allen and Payne, both coming from Alabama. They're excellent players, and they've got some others on the team as well. But Sainristil, coming from a winning program at Michigan, the winningest last year, the national championship, and then joining a team that's now 3-1, and talking to reporters yesterday about the joy of winning.
Whenever you're winning, that right there itself just allows everything to feel much better. Like, it's much easier to correct film after a win than it is after a loss. But the teams that want to be great still hold each other. We hold each other to our standard. There's a lot of accountability on this team. We know that where we want to go, there's a lot of things that we still need to continue cleaning up. But winning creates a lot of fun.
You guys are all obviously so physically gifted, but the mental side of having the momentum, having the confidence, is that a real thing? Kind of explain that to us of how that can maybe translate onto the field of just that good feeling of confidence.
It's like, when you defense is waiting to get on the field after, offense goes down and scores. Like, you take the field with a lot of confidence, like, okay, let's go out there, let's get them the ball back so they could go do it again. When special teams has a great play, energy boosting play, that gives the offense a good feeling, the defense a good feeling. So, like, just being able to play off of each other, I think that's what the really great teams have the capabilities of doing. It just shows a lot of brotherhood that guys are out there playing for each other.
One thing he said that it sounds counterintuitive, where he says it's easier to correct things on tape after a win than after a loss. Wouldn't you think it would go the other way? Like, they have your attention more? Like, it worked. What are you criticizing me for? We won the game. He's saying, I guess, that there's more happy feelings, more positive feelings. I don't know. It's that would not seem to be the way that would work. Like, you would have their attention after a loss rather than a win. But he says it's easier to correct things on tape after a win than after a loss. If I was a reporter, I would ask Dan Quinn about that and maybe to explain that. Maybe he agrees, maybe he doesn't agree. I don't know. But I found that to be interesting. John Allen, one of the guys that they got from the Alabama store, and he finally blew up. Was it last year or the year before? Maybe it was a year before, where they lost a game at Philadelphia, and he dropped a bunch of F-bombs and was like, okay, this guy's had enough. He wants to get out of here. He's local, went to Stonebridge High School, signed an extension to stay. I believe they're done with that after next year, so I would wonder whether he comes back next year or after this year, the contract ends. But he's now finally, after coming here 7 years ago, it's his 8th year, I think, with the team, 7th or 8th year. This is his thoughts on how things have started and the key to sustaining this kind of success.
When you're not focused solely on the end goal as far as like wins and losses, but the process on how to get wins and losses, I think that's important. Obviously, the end goal is to win, but if you play bad and win, there's a lot of things to improve on. Not saying we did, but I just think you focus on the process more than anything.
Defensively, Coach Quinn said you guys are close. You're real close. You had your best, probably your game on Sunday against Arizona. How do you build on that kind of going into Sunday against Cleveland?
By doing the little things that we did the week leading up to Arizona and playing in the game in Arizona and doing it again this week and just day by day stacking good days one after another.
That's John Allen, who is a leader on this team and thought that when he got here from Alabama that there would be more wins than they've had so far. He's played in one playoff game, and that was off a 7-9 season. Now, to the subject that has the NFL on its ear, and they can't say enough good things about him on the talk shows, is the Jaden Daniels start. They haven't seen anything like this, well, since last year with C.J. Stroud, but maybe this is even more impressive what he's been able to do, because they didn't win like this at the beginning. They started out 0-2 with him, and so now we have a team that has gotten better in the last 4 weeks. You've certainly seen Jaden get better week after week, and Dan Quinn has talked about this, that it's very impressive to see a young man who has confidence and is humble at the same time. Now, the question is, can this keep up? It appears that he's not going to change the way he is. He does seem to have that demeanor of, I'm here to learn everything I can and do the best I can. He seems to have great perspective on things. And so when asked yesterday about keeping Daniel's feet on the ground, Quinn said, basically it's not that hard to do.
It's very easy to support Jaden. And the reason I say that, Chick, because you see it every day in terms of the work that he's, puts in and goes for it. So there's no extra things that you have to say to him in this regard, because like you see the character of what the man is. Had it been up and down and I was worried, I'd have that conversation. But all he has shown all of us since he's been here is like a relentless approach to getting better and staying in the moment, and he's got like a remarkable level-headedness to him that's wise, beyond his age. So if I had concerns, I would have already addressed it. I'm certain of that. But he is a very easy guy to support, and being on this journey with him and starting with it together, it's a really cool thing that I get to be a part of with him.
Yeah, and if he's saying privately what he's saying publicly, you can understand how easy it is. This is Daniels yesterday with the same thought process. What about staying grounded? What about keeping everything in perspective as you've now become this instant celebrity around the NFL and around sports?
The main thing is keeping the main thing, man. That's football. How can I get better each and every week? Not get caught up in what people are saying or anything, because none of that really matters, because I could be playing good and playing bad and people be thinking the opposite. So it's staying level-headed, go out there and just focus on what's up, what's now, and be where my feet are.
Back here, Jaden, I don't know if you remember in the offseason we asked you something similar about what it's like, getting everything that comes with being a star. You said, I'm not a star yet, I'm a rookie. But four games into the season now.
No, I'm still a rookie.
Yeah, I know. Question for you now is 4 games into the season, you're having the success. You're being mentioned in statistics with some of the all-time greatest quarterbacks of all time. You guys are 3-1. Can we at least say star rookie now? And how do you feel about, just the success you're having in that regard?
Man, y'all can say whatever y'all want. I'm still a rookie in my eyes, so I let everybody else do the talking for me. I don't get caught up in that stuff. But, man, it's a blessing. Just the preparation, obviously the team believing in me, and we're going out there and competing every Sunday. That's
Jaden Daniels yesterday. The other thing that this is, I think, the most important thing he said yesterday about the conversations with coaches, them telling him what he needs to hear, not what he wants to hear. And this is the exact audio from that yesterday in Ashburn.
Obviously, they tell me, how proud they are of me and stuff like that. But the main conversation, like, man, how'd you feel? What do you think you can improve on? Stuff like that. So I appreciate those guys to, not really tell me what I want to hear, but what I need to hear, stuff like that. So it's just those honest conversations that we have.
And I'm not picking on RG3, but there was nothing like that coming out of his mouth 12 years ago. He was, he had slogans. He still has slogans he puts out on Twitter. He had endorsements with Gatorade and Adidas. Nothing wrong with that. But Jaden Daniels seems to be all about football. And I saw an interview with Peyton Manning recently where he said that he turned down a lot of endorsements during his rookie year because he wanted to concentrate on football, wanted to do something first, wanted to win something first. Now, that team wasn't good. He went 3-13 through 28 interceptions. This team now, this team is being touted as a division champion. And FanDuel, which had their win total going into the season at 6.5, the number is now 8.5. So if you're betting on the over-under for the season, you got 3 under your belt right now. But the over-under is 8.5, and it's a long season. Anything can happen, and including injuries, and God forbid something happens to Jaden Daniels. But 8.5. Looks doable in a 17-game schedule. It does look that way. But, long season left to play. Veterans reminding about that yesterday. Zach Ertz said in a couple of months, nobody's going to care about our first 4 games, that sort of thing. But everything is going better than they could have expected. And now, what happens with the next step? That's Quinn yesterday answering that.
Staying consistent in this process, like staying in this pocket of the people, that he's getting ready. And so now that you've established a routine of what that looks like, that you're just able to stay into that spot over the long haul. Like here we are just starting October. And so like staying in that process and having routines for any ball player or coach too, it's really important. So that way you don't kind of get out of whack. All of a sudden you could miss something and then you're out of whack. So for him, the process that he goes through, he's very strict about it. And I think that's a big part of him, just staying in that pocket. But he's such a fantastic teammate. The guys are here to support him in just about any way you could.
It sounds that way. Everything that they say about him and the way he supports his teammates on the field. And I like the low-key part of it, where every time he's asked about the success, he goes, I'm just a rookie. I got to learn. It's all about football for me. That's exactly what you want to hear. I don't think that you could criticize anything about him right now. At least it's visible. There could be things that are percolating underneath the surface, and the coaches are having to deal with it. But there are absolutely no signs of that for an organization that always has trouble. If you've been watching this team for 25 years, what it looks like on the surface isn't always the way it is underneath the surface. And what we're seeing on the surface right now appears to be the real thing. I mean, you're hesitant to believe with everything we as a fan base have gone through during the Dan Snyder years, but man, when you put together an organization and run it professionally, like they have, and that you do have a general manager, that you have ownership that isn't meddling, doesn't tell them what to do, asks good questions, hires good people, lets them do their job. Yeah, it's a whole new world, and it's a world that didn't exist with this franchise for too many years. One quick thing on college basketball: we're about to launch the season. Used to be that they had Midnight Madness. Remember October 15th? In fact, Maryland started Midnight Madness, where Lefty Driesell first had a 1 mile run 1 minute after midnight when they still had a track around the football stadium, which is now called CQ Field. It was Bird Stadium in those days. And at midnight, he had a 1 mile run. And then a year later, they started to have a scrimmage in Cole Fieldhouse that would start at 12:01. And that started Midnight Madness across the country. Now, it doesn't seem like there's a definite date when you can start practice, so it doesn't have that kind of thing. ESPN used to televise it live from various sites, and Dick Vitale would be there hyping it up and things like that. They don't really do that anymore. But I guess in the next week or so, if they haven't already started practice, they're going to get that going now. Maryland is picked to finish 10th in the Big Ten, which sounds kind of funny, but they're 18 teams, so they're right in the middle there. And then Purdue was picked to win the league again. They got 20 of the 33 first-place votes. Guard Braden Smith is expected to be Player of the Year. Zach Edey won it last year. Maryland had a disappointing year last year, as you know, 16-17, 12th in the Big Ten, but they supposedly had a really good recruiting year. And, yeah, I like Maryland basketball. Should be fun season for them. All right, that's enough of that nonsense. We've got Ram coming up next, and I will be back here tomorrow on a Friday. Yep, got a Friday coming up and a big football Friday. We do Ravens preview as the Ravens are playing this weekend. They play the Ravens and the Commanders play a week from Sunday, and that'll be an afternoon game in Baltimore. Bram next. Enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll see you back here tomorrow coming up at 9 a.m.